over to the book of Genesis with me, and did you get copies of this tonight? Did this get passed out? Anybody see those? They're inside the prayer sheet. All right, good. You don't have to have it, but if there's, we're going to cover a lot of territory tonight. Might be a little review, and it will be some review and some things maybe you're familiar with, and kind of a springboard, taking off where we left on the series on God's meeting with people. Where did God meet? First at an altar, and then in the tabernacle, and then in the temple, and then the body of the believer. We'll be there in just a minute. Quickly, I have two announcements here I want to mention. We're still working on budget things, and we're operating on last year's budget, and we're thinking we'd give you a new budget tonight, but it might be next week before we get a new budget to propose to you. And then also, I mentioned this last Sunday, and if you have any thoughts, any good, bad, or whatever, but we've got for the roof, the front section, we got more than we needed for the front section, but not enough to do another section of the roof in our spring offering. And we're talking about using that right when we took that offering. The air conditioning went out in the friendship room, which is significant when summer comes. It might hurt Ken Peterson's attendance, and my room's got air conditioning, by the way. But anyway, that's about a $3,000 thing. We've got more than that extra, and so I'm going to just suggest that we take that extra, instead of letting it sit for a year or more till we do the next section of the roof. Let's put it into air conditioning, but we'll let you make a decision on that down the road. We're going to be in Genesis chapter 12, but before we do, if you want to scribble a verse at the front of your of this little outline, we're going to take some time and talk about Israel as a nation. And the Zechariah 2:8, just a simple statement in Zechariah. It says, "He that toucheth you toucheth the apple of his eye." Talking about the nation of Israel in that passage. The 3 or 4 times it used the phrase, the apple of his eye. But in this case, he's talking about Israel. Israel is sacred to God. And there's 2 ways you start judging political or religious or whatever people. One is what they think of babies, and the other is what they think of Israel. And all the way back to Pharaoh saying kill the babies, to people aborting babies today, you can pretty much make your first major division on who's good and who ain't good is what they think of babies. And that's just a pretty simple thing. I mean, how dumb do you have to get to think that it's okay to kill a baby? But then secondly, what their view of Israel. And of course, Hitler had an issue with Israel, and lots of major world powers in the past had a problem with Israel. And it's amazing today, one of the reasons I decided to just keep our study going, since we laid the groundwork on the temple and worship, to bring in Israel, is we've got a bunch of people in politics right now who are openly, blatantly anti-Israel. They are anti-Semitic. Used to be calling somebody anti-Semitic was like cussing them, and now it's just saying they're a Democrat. And a liberal, because most Democrats are not that way. That's not a fair statement. But the far left wing is anti-Israel. But just so you understand, there are, in the circle of Christians, and I'm considering them Christians, I don't know why I wouldn't, but there are people who think that when the church came into existence, God pitched Israel out, and the church became his chosen. And all the promises to Israel became promises to the church. The problem is, when you start playing with that kind of a doctrine, then what do you do at the time of Jacob's trouble and the tribulation? Since God's tossed Israel out, he's not worried about them anymore. Now you got to have the church going through the tribulation, either half the tribulation or all the tribulation. And then what are you going to do with the 144,000? And it just like dominoes, it starts, and you start sounding like an idiot, because one doctrine after another begins to crumble, and you start grasping at straws trying to prove what you believe because you want to justify what you believe here. The easiest just to say God loves Israel. All the way to the book of Romans, the Apostle Paul said, "My heart's desire and prayer to God is that Israel might be saved." He said, "I would that I myself should be cursed, that Israel might be saved." And there's no question that Israel is a very chosen and special place. We're going to talk a little bit about it, but I want us to look at Israel and make sure that our young people grow up understanding, because we are in a culture that's very anti-Israel. And so we're going to start tonight a little bit of review where we've been on the matter of the temple and Mount Moriah, and then get us to where the nation of Israel came from, and how it, and of course it kind of intertwines a little bit with what we've been doing. But look with me if you would. First of all, do you have those slides? Are you guys together? Get me the very last slide is the state of California. And you can flip these front lights off if you want, because I don't want to miss this. And it's not really part of the Bible study, but I just think that's me. How about that? It's not California, but well, it is. It's Wildomar, California. There we go. I mentioned this a few weeks ago. That yellow part in the middle, and again, the borderline of Israel is even debatable, which isn't it sad that a country still can't establish their borders. But that is Santa Barbara up to the, I'm going to say I can't quite read it, Reno or somewhere up there. But that yellow part is the entire nation of Israel geographically dropped into California. And that helps us realize that's the most valuable piece of real estate on the planet. In a minute, we'll look at just Jerusalem, which is the most valuable piece of property in Israel. But just an example to show you how very tiny Israel is. And the idea, one of the best maps I saw was of the Six-Day War. We may get to that a little bit as we study the Bible. But when all these countries, all the way around Israel, including Egypt, you know, it's a sad thing. Another parenthesis here. Somebody was interviewing college students and asked them about the Six-Day War. Most of them had never heard of it and didn't know what it was about. They were interviewing college students about Auschwitz. Could you tell us about Auschwitz, what you know about it? And they thought it was a new brand of clothing. And when we have a culture of young people who don't understand the prison camps, and in our class, I teach a junior-senior seminar the second semester, twice a week we do, and every other year we go through Dachau and Auschwitz, and we study the Holocaust. Many college students today and young adults, you ask about the Holocaust, and they'll say, well, that's one of those debatable things. Maybe it happened, maybe it didn't. That's an evil thing that's happened in our world, and it's beyond words stupid. It's an intellectual folly to be so historically stupid, but it's a political and a moral wrong, and then it's a spiritual wrong. So it's historical, it's political, it's moral, and then of course spiritual. So anyway, we can go off that, and you can go back to the very first one, just a map of the whole place, Don, if you would. There we go. We'll talk about that in a minute. Yeah, and I think the lights are okay where they are. Let's look at Genesis chapter 12 with me, and go to the last two verses of chapter 11, right before chapter 12. So chapter 11, verse 31. And Terah took Abram his son, and Lot the son of Haran his son's son, and Sarai his daughter-in-law, his son Abram's wife, and they went forth, with them from Ur of the Chaldees to go into the land of Canaan, and they came to Haran and dwelt there. And the days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. Hold your place there. So if you look over to the far right, I didn't bring my pointer tonight, but in the far right-hand corner, Persian Gulf comes up, and it says Ur. You are there. That would be our area of Iran, Iraq, and that area. And so Abraham was there, and that was a godless place and a wicked place. And I'm following my notes, not yours. So you just do your best, and I'll do my best to try and be clear. But God called Abraham to go from there, follow the arrows up to Haran, up to the north. Saudi Arabia would be that big clear spot in the middle. And then down to the place where number 3 is on the map, and that's Shechem. And it's pronounced differently there, but in the text we'll read in a minute. But that was the first move of Abraham, and then we'll look at that some more. So let's read now in chapter 12. God called Abraham to leave Ur. By the way, he also called him to leave his family, and he left with his dad and with his nephew. And just because you're godly doesn't mean you always hit everything right, and that's all of us. So verse 1, now the Lord had said to Abram, Get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, unto a land that I will show thee, and I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. Now hold your place. We're going to keep reading there in a minute, but let me just give you some background here. The nation of Israel began like everything else with God. Any good thing starts with God. That's why it's so important we raise our children with God. From the very beginning of life, read the Bible to the children. Get the children to sing Christian songs, and fill your children's life with God's Word and with the knowledge of God and a love for God, a love for God's house. But all good things start with God. Genesis 1, in the beginning, God. The whole of everything started with God. And when we talk about Israel, it started with God and God calling him. 4,000 years ago, God set in motion a plan. The plan of the ages to set up and order a society and a people and all the pieces perfectly in place so that there could be a redeemer, so there could be the people of God, so there could be the bride. And boy, you think there's so many things. We're talking about this at home. I have deep theological discussions over Italian pastas this evening. But you've got the bride. We get the New Jerusalem, and who's gonna? If we're the modern day Israel, then who gets the New Jerusalem, and who gets earth? And boy, you mess all your eschatology up. But anyway, this plan of God, a beautiful plan, and God initiated all of it. And we're going to keep going back to that. But how much we need to just cling to God. And what's really great is you go back through all the ages, all the stupid and all the sinful and all the foolish and all the inconsistent, God's still getting his work done. It's God's work. And God will see his work through, and God will see people saved, and how wonderful it is that we have God. Mankind, back in these days, tragically depraved. In Genesis 6, they get off the story of Noah's Ark, and it says that every imagination of man's heart was only evil continually. That's a pretty huge statement. Continually. And so God looks down from heaven and reaches out to the heart of a man in the land of Ur, a 75-year-old guy and his wife. And think about this. He says, I'm going to make a great nation out of you. He's 75, and they don't have any children yet. This is starting late, so don't worry about you being late in life. Hold your finger there and look over to Genesis. In fact, I think Joshua's in your notes. It is Joshua chapter 24. If you just want to look at your notes and stay in Genesis, or turn in your Bible to Joshua 24. Now let me give you the how do we get to Joshua 24? So here's creation, fall, flood, the Tower of Babel, and then Abraham is in the book of Genesis. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. Joseph sold into Egypt. Joseph brings his family all down. 70 or so, 75 people come down into Egypt. And there they are in Egypt for 400 years, basically. And that 70 people turn into a couple of million people. And they leave Egypt over way down here in the bottom where it says Egypt down there. They cross over. This is called the Negev Desert, which is in modern term, but into the mountains of Sinai. And down there is they get the 10 Commandments. And then they go up to Kadesh Barnea, which is about where that number 7 is on the map. And they don't go in. They come back. They wander for 40 years in the wilderness. And a whole generation dies. They come around the other side of the east side of the Jordan where the word Bethel is. Bethel is the dot on the west side, but the name's on the east. And about where Bethel is, Moses dies and Joshua takes over. So you all know what we're talking about, right? So all those years from Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, 430 years down in Egypt, they cross, they wander in the wilderness 40 years, they come all the way around. That's Joshua. So right here, Joshua crosses the Jordan River, and they go through the land of Canaan, subdue the land of Canaan, many years of battle going on. Joshua's an old man now, and he's nearing the last days of his life, and we're reading Joshua 24. So Joshua 24, verse 2. So understand, a lot of years have passed since Abraham. And Joshua said to all the people, Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, Your fathers dwelt on the other side of the flood in old time, even Terah, the father of Abraham, and the father of Nachor, and they served other gods. Verse 3, and I took your father Abraham from the other side of the flood and led him throughout all the land of Canaan and multiplied his seed and gave him Isaac. So it says in verse 3, the first few words, and I took your father. Clear over there, it was God who initiated this thing. The nation of Israel is what it is because God started it. If you go back to the last few words of verse 2, and they served other gods. That society in Ur was not a godless, like no gods. It was evil. There's all kinds of gods, and it was a horrible mess over there. And in order for God to set up a nation like he wanted, he had to get them out. He had to call his people, starting with Abraham, out of the land of Ur to a new place that would be just them. And then, of course, we'll get down to Egypt a little bit later on. We'll come back and talk about Egypt. But God calls a man, and thank God for his calling. It's he that does it. And as all good things, God initiates the relationship. You know, you got saved because God initiated it. We weren't walking up and down the street saying, oh, where is God? And if you were, it's because God was drawing you. And I was thinking, often I think about how merciful God was as a boy. My mom took me to a Lutheran church a couple times, once or twice to a Catholic church, and a few times to a Baptist church one summer. I'm not sure how we ended up at a Baptist church, but it was down the street. And I remember I got a Bible there, and I had it on the shelf in my room. And I remember about, 5th grade, 6th grade, somewhere in there. I remember just sitting there looking at that thinking, I want to read that. That'd be a good thing. And so I get that Bible, and at night everybody's in bed, and so I'm reading this Bible. I had no idea what I was reading. But I remember tucking it between the wall and the mattress, and God was drawing me toward him in incredible mercy. And if you were to tell the story, you'd know there's time after time. I was in the 8th grade, a girl I knew, a bunch of us friends, but this one girl in particular, because most of what boys do, they do because of a girl. And this girl invited me to come to a concert in the park, an open-air concert. We went to a city park. And that was the first time I was in an environment where there was an invitation. I didn't know it was an invitation, but looking back now, I know. But they had a bunch of music. I guess there was preaching, but I was sitting by a girl, so I had no idea what else was going on. And but I remember us all standing, and they said, if you're a Christian, raise your hand. I raised my hand. And the girl I was with, Lisa Dial, remember her name? She was ugly compared to my wife. But anyway, dumb little girl. But anyway, I looked, I raised my hand, and she looked at me and she said, are you a Christian? And I said, of course I'm a Christian. I'm thinking, what do you think I'm, a heathen from the jungles or something? You know, America, apple pie, I love my mom. Of course I'm a Christian. I had no clue what a Christian was. But God was drawing me and loving me, and how patient God is. And anyway, I'm so thankful for people, and one after another, God put these people in my life. God initiates these things. Jesus said, no man can come unto me except the Father draw him. And just a thought for you that have children and grandchildren, pray for your kids. Pray God works on their heart. Pray God draws your children to him, because parents, we can, a good parent might be able to discipline a child, a good parent might be able to educate a child, but you can't do this. Only God can do that to a heart. And God is the one who works in the heart. And we ought to pray for our children and our grandchildren, that God in mercy would draw our children to him and have them want to love him. and there's no guarantees. God's got plenty of his kids who have drifted far. So all that, let's go back to Genesis 12 now, if you might be still there. But we're in Genesis chapter 12. And this is, if you read or you hear about the Abrahamic covenant, this is where it all began. And this covenant was renewed to Isaac, and it was renewed in Jacob's life as well. But if you look at verse 3, he says, I will bless them that bless thee. Now this is the worldwide promise. And curse him that curseth thee, and in thee shall all the families of the earth be blessed. And so that's the promise. And all of our presidents, not all, but I'm going to say all from my historical knowledge, until recent years, our presidents loved Israel. We've always been a pro-Israel country. And there may have been an exception, but none that I know of, and I'm not the historical wizard, but our country has been a pro-Israel country up until our last president or two. And so in verse 4, so Abraham departed as the Lord spoke to him, and Lot went with him, And Abram was 75 years old when he departed out of Haran. And Abram took Sarai his wife. And if you're not familiar, Abram, his name was changed to Abraham. Sarai, her name was changed to Sarah. Not a significant, but just if you're wondering what that is. Abram took Sarai his wife and Lot his brother's son, and all their substance they gathered, and the souls that they had gotten in Haran. And they went forth to go into the land of Canaan, and into the land of Canaan they came. Verse 6 is our text now. And Abram passed through the land unto a place of Sychem, unto the plain of Morah. And that Morah, if you remember that little word, we'll see this come up, and that's really where we're going to be for the night. And the Canaanite was then in the land. So go to the next picture there. And so this is more of a close-up, just looking at some of our geography. Go back to the last one, and let's compare it to this one. So where the number 2 arrow going down, it stops right at the Sea of Galilee, where it says Shechem. And then you see Bethel, Ai, Hebron, and Sodom, number 6 there. That number 3 to number 6, that's this next map. So go to the next map. And so this is where Abram came in, and Abram's first stop was at this place called Shechem, near Mount Gilead, Mount Ephraim, Mount Gerizim, right in the middle of those, between these places. And I know it's not a huge difference, but I think the more familiar you are, the better it is when you start reading your Bible. So look down a little bit further, and so in verse 6, Abram, this is the first place he stopped. Then look at verse 7. So God made the promise now to make Abraham a great nation. And then God promised whoever would be good to Abraham, God to be good to them. Whoever was bad to Abraham, God to be bad to them. And so Shechem was on the plain of Morah, that's about 40 miles north of Jerusalem. So Genesis 12:7. And the Lord appeared to Abram and said, unto thy seed will I give this land, and there builded he an altar unto the Lord who appeared to him. So as soon as Abraham got settled in the land of Canaan, he put an altar. We read this a few weeks ago about the altars and the altar worship. And if you look at verse 8, Abraham moves to a place called Bethel. And Bethel, go back to the last map. Bethel is there right below Shechem, and this is all right near Jerusalem. And so he goes to Bethel. Beth-El. Beth is the house, and El being abbreviation for God. So the house of God, later Bethel was named that. And so in verse 8, he removed from thence unto a mountain on the east side of Bethel, and pitched his tent, having Bethel on the west and Hai on the east. And there he builded an altar unto the Lord, and called upon the name of the Lord. So again, the altar. God called Abraham and brought this whole nation into being for one reason, that they would worship him and serve him. And by the way, that's why he saved me and you. He didn't save us so we could make money and have a nice house. He in mercy, lets us make money, and in mercy, lets us have homes, and lets us have jobs, and lets us have families and cars and hobbies and all the wonderful thing. Paul told Timothy, warn them that are rich in this world, that they be not high-minded, nor trust in uncertain riches, but in the living God who hath given us all things richly to enjoy. All these great things, they are to enjoy, but that's not why we're here. That's the fringe benefit of being here. The big thing is to serve God and to love people. The great commandment, to love God, the next to love people. So he built another altar. Now God was establishing a society that would be for his praise and his worship. God was pulling out of the whole world a small group of people to worship him. And one of our young people some time ago came to me and said, I'm the only one in my family who's saved and in church. And they were bemoaning a little bit, and I understand that. I have no problem with that, and we'd all like to have all of our family in church. But I said, isn't it good that you're saved? Isn't it good that in mercy, you are the one that in mercy God drew you, and you're the one that for whatever reason responded, and that God's letting you serve him. And let's don't so grieve over those who didn't want to follow God that we forget we get this great honor, an honor beyond words, that we get to serve the King. Out of all the people over in Ur the Chaldees, God called Abraham and his family. Man, I am so thrilled that me and my wife and our kids and my sister and now many years later, my brother got saved 30 years after the rest of us did, and my dad and mom have loved God and served God. Let's don't forget the unbelievable privilege. Yeah, we've got a godless world out there, but isn't it awesome we're not? I'm so thankful I get to be where I am, doing what I'm doing. So God established something special in this city and in this culture, a nation to bring the word of God and the light of God's glory to the world. So we're talking about Abraham now. So go to another picture. Go to the third one there. Now we're going to fast forward about 800 years. Now that is a crowded city. But it wasn't that way 2,000 years ago. This is Mount Moriah. So let's look at a couple of verses. Let's shift over to Exodus chapter 4. We're going to come back to Genesis. We'll be back and forth Genesis to Exodus. We find Moses caring for some sheep. Remember, he's 40 years in Pharaoh's court, and he's 40 years up in the mountains, probably in the area right where the Ten Commandments were given. And in Exodus chapter 1, so God's creating this nation called Israel. Tonight, again, a little bit of a disjoint, throwing things out to help us see where did Israel come from. But God called this nation Israel for one reason, to serve him. So in Exodus chapter 1 and verse 4, we see, and they made their lives bitter with hard bondage in mortar and in brick and in all manner of service in the field, and all their service wherein they made them serve was with rigor. Now, remember we talk about repetition? Do you see any repetition in there? The word serve or service 3 times in one verse. You'll look a long time before you find the word serve and service 3 times in one verse. So in Exodus chapter 1 verse 4, he's talking about the people of Israel have been down in Egypt and their slave labor. And 3 times he says they were made to serve, and their service was, and they served Egypt. And here they were, and you know what? They're not supposed to be serving Egypt. They're supposed to be serving God. So God steps in and says, we're going to fix this thing. And so look over to chapter 3, if you would, and look at verse 12. Chapter 3, verse 12. Now this is God and Moses talking. And he said, certainly I will be with thee, and this shall be a token unto thee that I have sent thee. When thou hast brought forth the people out of Egypt, ye shall serve God upon this mountain. Now remember where the burning bush was? That's where he is. And this is also where he comes back one day to worship, 40 days of fasting, 40 days when he gets the 10 Commandments. So over here, 3 times God says they served Egypt, and the service of Egypt. And God says, you know what? I want them serving me. And he said the covenant or the promise or the token to make sure you understand I'm doing this, you're going to come right back here and you're going to serve me one day. Look over a chapter more to chapter 4, verse 23. Now, God is speaking to Pharaoh through Moses. Chapter 4, verse 23. And I say unto thee, let my son go, that he may what? Serve me. That's what it's all about, that he may serve me. Chapter 4, verse 23. And if thou refuse to let him go, behold, I will slay thy son, even thy firstborn. So God was calling a people out of the world. So we can go back to Ur the Chaldees, where we were a few minutes ago. We're going to get to Moriah in a minute. He called them out of Ur because he said, I need a people pulled out of the world to serve me. Now they're locked up in Egypt. And again, he says, I need to pull them out of the world and I need to bring them to me. My goal is that these people would serve me. And you see this over and over, and how much God longs for you to know him, to walk with him, and to read his word, and to pray, and to honor him with your life. Our very existence is to walk and talk with the Lord Jesus Christ, and then to tell others about him and encourage others. We have such a great God, and we should talk about him. In chapter 12, he says, if you look at chapter 12 and verse 12, we're in Exodus. Just a quick statement. You know all those plagues, the flies and the lice and the frogs and the water to blood and all that. Each one of those was a slap in the face of these heathen gods. Because over in Ur, they had all these gods. Remember, he said earlier in Joshua 24, he said, your fathers served all these gods over there. And then down in Egypt now, we see these gods that were controlling things. Exodus 12:12, for I will pass through the land of Egypt this night, and I will smite all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and against all the gods of Egypt will I execute judgment. I am the Lord. And God's, every one of these plagues, like they worshiped the river. What was the first thing that happened? The river turned to blood. And God, one by one, just started kicking down their little deities. And the last god, they thought the firstborn was divine, and they had special places of worship for the firstborn child. And God said, tell you what I'll do, I'm going to kill your firstborn children. And boy, God was knocking down their gods one after another, and making it very clear, he's God. And it's all about serving him. So we go back then over to the book of Genesis chapter 14. So for the second time now, God has called the people out of a heathen country and said, I want you to walk with me. I want you to serve me. I want you to know me. Genesis chapter 14, we're going to get here to Mount Moriah in a minute. Now, Mount Moriah, this is how it looks today. There's lots of city, and you can't see because of the light. But there's almost no trees in Israel. It's just, and all the buildings are that plain white color. It's very boring. But anyway, it's expensive boring. Shift to that next map, number 4, Don, and then we'll read another verse. So look over with me at Genesis 14. Genesis back. So we've been in Exodus. Go back to Genesis chapter 14, and we have the story of Abraham. And he delivers Lot from Sodom and Gomorrah. And you know what? I got the wrong one. Don, one of those maps has got Sodom in it. It's either number 7 or number 2. You figure it out. There we go. There's Sodom right there. You can't see it very good. But the Dead Sea, here's Moab off to this side, right where the Dead Sea meets Sodom. There's a question mark. They don't know exactly where it is. Probably underwater in the Dead Sea. So there's the Dead Sea, then Sodom, and then Gomorrah, and then Zoar. And remember that Zoar was a place Lot fled with his daughters. And so, and you can put the lights back up for people that want to see their Bibles. But so Genesis 14, Lot has been taken captive with a bunch of other people by these kings. Abraham grabs up his soldiers that were with his family and chase them all down. They bring them all back. And we're coming into the story of a man named Melchizedek in Genesis chapter 14. And Melchizedek, just trust me, is Jesus who showed up long before Bethlehem. And so Genesis chapter 14, and they're coming back. So chapter 14 and verse 18. And Melchizedek, the king of Salem, brought forth bread and wine, and he was the priest of the Most High God. And he blessed him and said, Blessed be Abram of the Most High God, possessor of heaven and earth. But I want you to notice in verse 18 where we read there, Melchizedek was the king of Salem. Salem means peace. Jerusalem, the city of peace, which I think is hilarious, because what city is heading to less peace than Jerusalem? But it's going to have peace one day. The word shalom that Jewish people use as a greeting, it means peace. It's from this word Salem or shalom, Jerusalem, from Salem. And so here's where we are. We got Melchizedek. He comes from Jerusalem to greet Abraham. Abraham tithes on all the good things, and then he goes on his way. Now just skip over to chapter 22. This is 400 years before Moses and Aaron and any other priest. Melchizedek was this high priest. And what we're looking at here is Mount Moriah and things that happen in Jerusalem. God narrowing down this place, Jerusalem, and look at chapter 22, and then maybe shift over to number 5, Don, I think number 5 is where we want to go. So we've got this Genesis 22, and again, this is familiar if you were with us a few weeks ago. In verse 1, it came to pass after these things God did tempt Abram, and he said to Abraham, and he said, Behold, here I am. And he said, Take thy son, thine only son Isaac, whom thou lovest, and get thee into the land of what? Moriah. And so we're going back over to that same place, the land of Moriah. We're looking for something, a bigger map than that. There we go. That's not exactly right, but we'll take it. Something that should say Jerusalem. But Jerusalem's right next to Bethel and Ai. It's right in that same area. And so this spot becomes the focal point of God meeting men. First he brings them out of Ur, and it was God initiating it, brings them over. They go down to Egypt. He brings his people out of Egypt, multiplies them, makes them very wealthy, multiplies them into millions. They come across the Jordan River. Over there, remember, Ai is right next to Jericho. Jericho's walls go down, then Ai. And then the time of the judges, 400 years of the judges, and then Samuel and Saul and David and Solomon. And Solomon puts up a temple. And it's all taking place right there, centering right where Bethel, Ai, and then Jerusalem is in there as well. And so here we've got God takes Abraham and says, take your boy Isaac up to the place called Moriah. This place where Abraham took his boy, laid him out, we studied it before, that spot, most people believe, is right where God called. In fact, look at verse 14 of chapter 22, right where the temple was built. Chapter 22, verse 14, and Abraham called the name of that place Jehovah-Jireh, as it is said to this day. And look at this, in the mount of the Lord it shall be seen. This mountain, this place, just skip a couple pictures till I see the one I want, Don. We'll go a couple more here. Then go to another one after that. These are all great maps. But and I have no idea what that's, way too much stuff for us. There we go. That's good. We'll take that one. Here's the Dome of the Rock, the Muslim dome put right where Solomon's temple was. And you can see this massive patio area out here. There's the walls coming up. And this huge patio. And then where the trees are, it stretches out that direction further, a long, long ways. When Solomon dedicated his temple on that spot, he sacrificed 22,000 oxen, 25,000 sheep. And then after they make the blood sacrifice, then they get to roast it and eat it. Now, how many people eat that much food? That was a big old Baptist picnic. And so we're talking about a spot here. Some people say 250,000 people could fit out there. And they were all there at the dedication of the temple. This is a spot, and this mount of the Lord. Now, behind it looks like Jerusalem's going up, but understand it kept getting tore down, built up, tore down, built up. And if you ever get a chance to go, I'm praying, I would like us as a group to be able to go over next year, not this January, but a year away. But if we could go as a group, you'll see you can walk through the old section, and they have holes dug. I mean, here you're in an underground mall that is already under the main surface, and there's holes 6 foot or 8 foot wide, and they go down and down and down and down and down, and it goes down city after city after city. So the city is built up, but the temple place has been a solid, stable place. This spot is where that temple was. So look with me. So chapter 22, verse 14, it's the mount of the Lord. It is God's place. It is this sacred spot. So we've got we've got Melchizedek coming from Jerusalem, and then we've got Abraham bringing Isaac to offer him there. And then you go a little bit further, if you want to go to 2 Samuel 24, and I think it's in your notes, and we're running out of time here. If you remember the story in 2 Samuel 24, remember David, Jerusalem is not Jerusalem yet. The temple's not there yet. And remember, he numbered the people, and all these people are dying, and he looks up and he sees outside, up on the hillside, Araunah, the Jebusite, had a threshing floor, a big flat area where they'd dump the grain out and they'd beat the grain and they'd throw it up in the air. A threshing floor would be away from houses so they get the best breeze. And then a lot of people would use a threshing floor. So they beat it, throw it up. Well, Araunah's up there threshing wheat. And David goes up, buys it, offers sacrifices up there, and God's wrath is appeased. And most people believe, again, that it's here or right next to it where the cross actually happened. But this is this spot. It all keeps happening. Everything, when God and man meet up, it's God doing something special. And if you want to look over, let me show you one more verse. Look at 2 Chronicles 3. And again, just for the sake of time, we'll put these things, kind of all these things in place. 2 Chronicles chapter 3. The temple that you're looking at here, not this one, but the temple that was built on this spot. 2 Chronicles chapter 3 and verse 1. It says, then Solomon, Samuel, Kings, and then Chronicles. 2 Chronicles chapter 3 and verse 1. Then Solomon began to build the house of the Lord at Jerusalem. Now look, in Mount Moriah. We've seen that name come up over and over. Where the Lord appeared to David, his father. The place that David had prepared in the threshing floor of Ornan, the Jebusite. And so this spot has been used over and over and over. At Solomon's prayer of dedication of the temple, let me read you a couple of lines. I think these verses are in here. Let me read you these just out of 1 Kings. Solomon's praying. He says, they shall hear thy great name and thy strong hand when he shall come and pray toward this house. He's talking about the temple that was built, how sacred a place of prayer. In 1 Kings 8:44, and they shall pray unto the Lord toward the city which thou hast chosen. God chose this place, and it was to be a place where they prayed. And then in chapter 8, verse 43, that all the people of the earth may know thy name and fear thee, as do the people of Israel. Remember when Jesus was cleansing the temple? He comes into the temple, knocks over the money changers' tables, chased animals out, and he says, my Father's house shall be what? House of prayer to all nations. God never had the intent of just getting Jewish people right. He wanted you. He wanted us to seek after him, and he wanted us in this spot. We won't look at any other picture for the sake of time, but this spot in the picture we saw of Mount Moriah is right outside this, or maybe the same. We were talking about 2,000 to 4,000 year old places, and I'm not going to fuss with people. But this is, God said, I want to meet with you. And this city that's been fought over and argued over and wars fought over and crushed and rebuilt and crushed and rebuilt, that place is very special to God. But understand this, when you got saved and the Spirit of God moved inside you, you have all the honor and love and closeness to God of that city, and maybe 100 times more, because the Spirit of God lives inside you. And it all came because God initiated this relationship. So this is kind of a jumble of review, but God chose Jerusalem very clearly. And by the way, the Jews love Jerusalem, Christians love Jerusalem, the Muslims love Jerusalem, but only one group gets it. It's the Jews. And by the way, after reading about the New Jerusalem, they can have this one. I'm wanting the New Jerusalem. But over and over and over, we're going to look at what God did with that piece of dirt. And tell you what, it is an awesome thing. But we're going to see over and over how God protect. When God, I have cousins, they fought and fought and fought. 3 cousins, Mike, Jamie, and Ronnie. Oh, they fought all the time. One time, Jamie had a big butcher knife chasing his brother, Mike, down the street, chasing. I don't know what he'd done. He'd caught him. But I remember one day I was with him, and the littlest one, Ronnie, was in a fight, and he's fighting some other kid. And the other kid was getting the best of him. And then Jamie or Mike, one of them, I don't know which one, went over and just kicked this kid right in the side and knocked him off. And he said, just kind of trying to keep it equal. Now, they could beat each other up, but don't you mess with them. And that's kind of how God is. God said, I can whoop my people, but don't you touch them, or I will beat the stuffings out of you. And we're going to talk about this city and what a wonderful place it is. Let's pray. Father, help us tonight. And as we see the beginning